In this pod, we'll look at how the Enabling Act was passed. We'll also look at the details of the Act and its impact upon Germany.
The Enabling Act was passed on the 23rd of March 1933. Its formal name was the Law to Remedy the Distress of the People and Reich. It was an important amendment to the Weimar Constitution. It enabled the Cabinet and Chancellor Adolf Hitler to enact law without the involvement or approval of the Reichstag. It was a temporary measure that would last 4 years. The Enabling Act caused a significant change to the Constitution and allowed Hitler to legally seize control and become a dictator.
The Nazi Party did not have a majority in the Reichstag at the time the Act was passed. Instead, the Nazis used their usual tactics of intimidation and violence to force the Act through. The members of the Reichstag met in the Kroll Opera House for the first time since the March election. As they arrived, they were confronted by SS troops blocking their path. Remember, the SS were an elite team of combat-trained men, formed originally as a bodyguard for Hitler and the Nazi leaders. The Reichstag politicians were forced to push through the men. The few communists who had not been arrested following the emergency fire decree were prevented from entering.
The threat of violence and intimidation continued inside the Opera House. MPs were confronted with lines of SA, the Nazi paramilitary force. They were stood around the surrounding walls. Outside, the SS chanted loudly, "We want the bill, or fire and murder." Terrified amidst the atmosphere of threat and violence, the Reichstag members were puppets.
The proceedings started with a speech from Hitler, who said, "By its decision to carry out the political and moral cleansing of our public life, the government is creating and securing the conditions for a really deep and inner religious life." The speech clearly linked Germany's future to Christianity. This was aimed at the Centre Party. Their support was vital because Hitler required a 2/3 majority for any bill that altered the constitution to pass. Ludwig Kass, the chairman of the Centre Party, also gave a speech, declaring his support for the amendment. This had been pre-arranged with Hitler, under the conditions that the Catholic Church would be protected under his leadership.
The bill was secured when the Centre Party gave its support. It was passed by 444 to 94 and was signed by President Hindenburg on the same day. It took great courage for politicians to vote against the Nazi Party. All of the 94 to oppose the amendment were members of the Social Democrat Party of Germany. Otto Wels, the chairman of the SPD, gave a brave counter-speech. He said, "At this historical hour, we German Social Democrats pledge ourselves to the principles of humanity and justice, of freedom and socialism." To Hitler directly he said, "You can take our lives and our freedom, but you cannot take our honor. We are defenseless, but not honorless." The Social Democratic Party of Germany was banned 3 months later, and Wels fled into exile.
The Enabling Act was short, a total of 5 articles. Articles 1 to 4 allowed the government to draw up the budget, approve treaties, pass legislation, and deviate from the constitution without the consent of the Reichstag. It allowed all laws to take place the day after the Chancellor announced them. However, the rights of the President were still unaffected. This meant that President Hindenburg and the army were the only people able to check Hitler's power. The 5th article of the Enabling Act simply legalized it from the date it was proclaimed, the 23rd of March 1933. It had an expiry date of either the 1st of April 1937 or when the Reich government was replaced.
Due to the great care that Hitler took to give his dictatorship an appearance of legality, the Enabling Act was renewed twice, in 1937 and then in 1941. However, its renewal was practically assured, as all other parties were promptly banned.